Antonin Scalia's dissent in Morrison versus Olson in 1988 is one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful expressions, accurate and clear, of the constitutional design of the executive branch in history. And as such, that's our topic today on the Republican Professor podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Lucas J. Mather. I also have an associate's degree. And we're coming to this in the context here on 15 February 2025 of President Trump's second term, the early weeks of his term, where President Trump seems more than any other president that I am aware of in recent decades, certainly in the last half of the presidency, to have an intuitive grasp of the principles in the Constitution on designing the presidency, the executive branch. And I'm going to share my screen here. Article 2, Section 1. The executive power shall be vested in a an unaccountable, unelected bureaucracy that Democrats call a democracy. No, that's not what it says. I'm reading it right now. It's shining on the screen for all to see. It says the executive power shall be vested in a few really loud, screeching members of Congress who are worried about getting their 1099s cut. No, no, actually, that's not what it says either. What would you know? Um, it says the executive power shall be vested in a bunch of grade inflated bureaucrats in the Department of Education who also in turn inflate other people's grades and work on destroying the country. That's what the framers put in the Constitution. No, that's not what it says either. It says the executive power shall be vested in a president of the United States of America. Period. Next word is he. That is a single person that has the entire executive power. Not some of it, all of it. Let me go back to Article 1. Article 1 creates the Congress. Section 1, all legislative powers. Do you notice something in there? Herein granted. It's qualified. Go back to Article 2. The executive power hereby cabined and defined in powers herein granted. No, that's not what it says. It says the executive power shall be vested in a person, one person. Donald Trump gets that. And that's why people like him, because they're, even though American people have been grade inflated for so long, their kids have been grade inflated, their grandkids. Somehow, some way, enough of them have gotten an intuitive grasp of what the Constitution requires, and they put Donald Trump in there. What do you know? A taxpayer revolt. What a blessing. Well, in 1988, there was a case that went before the United States Supreme Court called Morrison versus Olson. And I know that probably a lot of you, this is bedtime reading. Probably a lot of you have this on your refrigerators and plastered maybe somewhere on the corkboard in your garage. next to the blue Pabst Blue Ribbon stash that you have. Um, we're going to go through Scalia's dissent pacifically. Okay? Does that sound good? I'm going to take a drink of green tea. All right, kids. I'm doing the Rush Limbaugh ruffling the papers. I'm on 697B. How do you get there? Well, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to show you. Sharing my screen. Feel free to call me Sharon. Google Scholar. How do you search Google Scholar? Go to Bing, search DuckDuckGo, search Google Scholar. Will be the first one. All right. Federal courts, Morrison versus Olson. Well, what do you know? It's almost like that's a really popular thing to search for. It's a 1988 Supreme Court, clicky little wiki. It's 487, the 487th volume of the U.S. reports. That means there's 487 of those suckers in some law library somewhere, and it's in the 487th, and it's on page 654. 487 U.S. 654, 1988. It was argued April 26th, decided just a short time later, just a couple months later, June 29th, 1988. I'm going to let you look at what the dispute was all about if you want later, because I'm just going to dive right in. You're going to figure out what it was all about as we go along. And so much of the world occurs, so much of our learning occurs exactly that way. You know, kind of like when you're crossing the street and a car almost hits you, and that's how you learn. And so, or I guess you could get the lecture after that at some point. But so let's take a look at this. Okay, I'm going to pause. Okay, now what I'll say here by way of brief introduction is that what you can expect to learn is a clear and persuasive and accurate presentation of what the Constitution set up in its separation of powers regime. It's our ethnic identity as Americans, this thing we call American constitutionalism. We're growing into it. This is your bar mitzvah, okay? Or bat mitzvah, depending. And now we have much clearer understanding of those two things right now. Thank God. Thank you, President Trump. Not like we didn't know before, but every once in a while it's nice to have a president go, yeah, there's such a thing as male and female. Amazing. Who would have thought? Uh, so we're going to look through this. I'm sharing my screen again. And we're going to observe what Scalia is saying. It is the proud boast of our democracy that we have a government of laws and not of men. Men is gender neutral there. See previous episodes where I talk about that. If you doubt it, Google 1828 Webster's dictionary. It'll pull up. It's online now. It's very famous. And there's a search bar, and you can search man. And you'll see the first definition is gender neutral, includes men and women. And as an example, which is very common in dictionaries, the one of the most well-known pieces of literature in world history, certainly very influential on the founders, they were aware of it, was Genesis chapter 1. In that text, I think it's 1:26 and 27, God created man in his own image, male and female created he them. And so it's clear that the use of the word men is gender neutral. There. Okay. I can't believe I have to explain English, basic English at this point, but that's where we are with the great inflation. We're so far behind, we don't even know basic English, our own language. That's how bad this is. Don't blame me. Don't blame me. I do the best I can. It's not like I'm becoming a millionaire over here doing this, okay? Many Americans are familiar with that phrase. Not many know its derivation. It comes from Part the First, Article 30 of the Massachusetts Constitution of 1780, which reads in full as follows. In the government of this Commonwealth, the legislative department shall never exercise the executive and judicial powers, or either of them. The executive shall never exercise the legislative and judicial powers, or either of them. The judicial shall never exercise the legislative and executive powers, or either of them, to the end it may be a government of laws and not of men. The framers of the federal Constitution. Let me stop sharing my screen here. Now, the reason that this decision that I printed out, I like reading it on paper, is so crumpled is because it was raining cats and dogs when I was going through this with a cigar the other night. I like to do a lot of my prep work with a cigar outside, maybe a little bit of whiskey. After one glass of whiskey, I call it Wixie. And I just go through this and remind myself of what it says. This is stuff I first read a long time ago during my arduous 11-year process of getting a Ph.D. in American politics and public law. Public law and American politics. The very first course that I had as a Ph.D. student was called The Presidency and the Constitution, Professor Joseph M. Bissett. Wonderful class. Did he have us read this? Yes, he did. And that's where I first read it and thought deeply about it. Now I've read it many times since then, and it was on my public law. It might have actually been on both portions of the comprehensive exams I took for the PhD. I had an old school PhD program. There was no grade inflation. There were comprehensive exams that were 6 hours each. Okay? Not total, 6 hours for each part of the exam over multiple days. No studying guide. No study guide. No study guy. Okay? This was very intense. And I like it that way. You got the questions in an envelope, and you got you didn't have a bibliography or anything. You had to just did you pay attention or not? Were you the one writing those papers? And then it was proctored. There were no notes. There was no internet, and you had to write. You had to write the answers to the questions. You had to know it from memory. I don't know how they do it now. I mean, geez, but I'll tell you a little story about Bissett. His class, we were coming up on the final exam for that course, Presidency and the Constitution, and I was a little bit older. And I'd been in the military and I'd been in seminary, and I may have been the oldest person in that class. I'd already been teaching for years as a professor, and I was just really interested in the material, and I was so excited to be there at Claremont. And of course, Bissett is was on my committee, my Ph.D. dissertation committee, and um, he's over there at CMC at the time. That's where he finished his career. CMC is at Claremont McKenna College, and um, the 60% of the course grade was the final exam. And past about halfway, getting into three-fourths of the way through the semester, some of the younger ones started to get a bit fidgety, a bit nervous about this final exam. The class was 3 hours long once a week, and Bissett would start lecturing, and sometimes we were supposed to get a break in the middle. I think we all always technically got a break, but sometimes it was not at the halfway mark. It was more like the two-thirds mark. The guy was a machine. I'd never seen anything like it as far as this goes. He would lecture, and it was all very good, very substantive. It was like uh, drinking out of a fire hydrant in a good way. Detailed observations about the reading, history, theory. We had several books to read, several really dense articles, um, sev many Supreme Court cases. It was a diverse showing of the entire history of the American presidency as it relates to various portions of the Constitution creating the presidency. And so we're reading a lot. Somewhere around Thanksgiving, it was the fall, and somewhere around Thanksgiving, one of the younger kids, a student, a mere student, a student who was not a professor and had not been in the military, and was young. I mean, just came from undergrad. This student said nervously, uh, "Can we ask about the final exam?" It was coming up just after Thanksgiving and into December. And I think we had like a week between Thanksgiving and the exam or something like that. Uh, like the first week of December and then the second week of December, the exam. Supposed to be 3 hour exam. What? And 60% of the grade. We didn't know anything about the format of it. So I was listening. I was paying close. I definitely didn't choose that time to go to the bathroom, and I'm glad I didn't. Um, uh, the student posed this question, and Bissett said, yeah, I can." Yeah, you could tell he thought he was being helpful. He said, "Yeah, sure, I'll, I'll say a few words at the end." Um, I think it was the week before we were going on to Thanksgiving. And so we all made sure, we were staying even past the time. And it went into the night, this class. I think it was 4 to 7 or something like that. And it was like into 7 o'clock pretty well by the time A class was basically over, and kind of as an almost, it felt like it was an afterthought. He was like, "Oh yeah, yeah, let me say a few words about the exam, how to, Um, he said, somebody asked, "Is there going to be a study guide?" And I swear to you, because I was a professor at the time too. I'd been teaching for a few years already at that time, several years at the time, and um, Bissett had been a professor for at least 20 years and worked in government. He was an agency head in DC, Department of Justice, Bureau of Statistics. He'd worked for Mayor Daley in Chicago. He'd been around, okay? And Bissett, student of not oh my, I almost said Joseph Story. Wow. Yeah, he's a student of the anti. Yeah, he didn't study under Joseph Story. He's not that old. He was a student of Herbert Storing and some of these really top-notch guys at the University of Chicago. Um, so Bissett says to the student, um, "Yeah, the way you prepare for it is you have to know everything. Just review everything, and then review it again." And I mean, he thought he was given a study guide right there. And you could tell that he didn't really know what the student meant by a study guide. And there was a something that descended upon the class like, you really have to know this stuff. You should read it multiple times. Think deeply about it. Discuss it with each other. Review your notes. Read the text of the Constitution. Read the commentary on the Constitution in the Federalist Papers, edited by his colleague Charles Kessler, also another one of my professors, also a guest on this podcast. And that's what the students did. We walked in to that exam. He handed us an envelope, and you opened the envelope, and those were the questions. And that's the first time you saw them. The bibliography was the syllabus. The the study guide is the syllabus and the lectures. You take notes. That's your study guide. Take responsibility and learn. And by the way, it was a great experience. I had a special circumstance that nobody else had in class. Um, it was the awkward situation of being a professor. I was teaching in Malibu at Pepperdine, and I taught there for over a decade. And I don't know why they do this at Pepperdine. I mean, they did at the time. I don't know if they still, but the the way they did the final exams at Pepperdine was they would change. It wasn't me that did it. It was the administration would schedule the final not on a day that you had class. And so I think I was teaching Tuesday, Fridays or something like that. I did like that schedule, Tuesday, Friday. It was either Monday, Thursday, or Tuesday, Friday, twice a week. That's all I had to do is go up there twice a week to Malibu. Well, um, I believe the class was on a Thursday or something like that. And then they scheduled my final for a Thursday when I had already, agreed to be at Claremont on Thursdays. And Claremont didn't do that. They had this, the final exam was the last day, and it was on the same day as the class, so you can predict and plan your. So I had a very awkward situation where it's an in-person final. It's very clear that it's got to be proctored in person. I came to him and I said, I I have class 2 hours away. It's in the same county, but it's on the very other end of the most populous county in the United States. It's right on the ocean, the western part of the county. If you go any further, you're in the ocean. And Claremont is on the very eastern part of LA County, and there's a world of hurt in between during rush hour. And he said, "How late do you think you'll be?" And I said, "I don't know because of traffic." And so, this is like me trying to, I mean, I'm teaching all day. Then I have to battle rush hour from Malibu to Claremont, go right from that where I have to pee. I mean, I'm probably sweaty. I do believe I was sweaty because I don't think I had air conditioning. Well, actually, I wouldn't have needed it in December, but I was quite often sweaty. You want to get cleaned up a bit, just at least pour water over your face and wake up, kind of thing. Have another cup of coffee, your fifth for that day, depending on how early I started. And I it I went through a lot of sacrifice to do the training that I went through and to subject myself to extra suffering for the sake of America. I didn't have to. I did it because I wanted to do it. I wanted to learn this material and I wanted to study with the best. Bissett was a real champ. He said, "You know what? I'll bring a newspaper and I'll stay longer. Whenever you get here, I'll give you the same amount of time as everybody else. Don't worry about it. So just get here when you get here." So I was 2 hours late to a 3 hour exam. And guess what? He stayed 2 extra hours for me and just sat there and read the newspaper. That's a true professor, man. He also had the institution behind him. Claremont McKenna College is wonderful about providing their professors with institutional resources. He lived nearby. He got paid enough. He had a nice office. He could just walk over to his office. He had all of the administrative resources that were necessary to run a successful class and to be available to students. It's a wonderful time. But that's where I first encountered Rush Limbaugh. Not Rush Limbaugh, but I'm just doing the Rush Limbaugh. I miss that guy. That's where I first encountered this. So I want you to pay attention here. The framers of the federal Constitution similarly viewed the principle of separation of powers as the absolutely central guarantee of a just government. There's the connection with morality. There's the connection with natural law. We're not interested in just any old government for government's sake. This is justice we're interested in. Separation of powers protects individual liberty. Individual liberty is a necessary condition for human flourishing. In the number 47 of the Federalist, Madison wrote that no political truth is certainly of greater intrinsic value or is stamped with the authority, sharing my screen again, stamped with the authority of a more enlightened patrons of liberty. The Federalist 47 Oh, sorry, that was the footnote. Supposed to be in a footnote, but he didn't. So that was the Federalist 47, page 301, uh, the Rossiter edition from 1981. That's the one that Kessler later introduced back to Sidney Classics. Without a secure structure of separated powers, our Bill of Rights would be worthless, as are bills of rights in many nations of the world that have adopted or even improved upon mere words of ours. The principle of separation of powers is expressed in our Constitution in the first section of each of the first three articles. Article 1, Section 1 provides that all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States. I'm on page 698 now. You see that? You see how it says 698 right there? That's the page number right there. It's in gray, it's in the middle. If you pull it up on Chrome, I'm on Firefox right now, but if you pull it up on Chrome, the page numbers are quite appropriately on the side, and it's just easier. Like I have them, this is printed out from Chrome. I've got them on the side here. States which shall consist of, um, shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives. Article 3, Section 1 provides that the judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court and in such superior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain and establish. And the provision at issue here, Article 2, Section 1, Clause 1, provides that the executive power shall be vested in a President of the United States. But just as the mere words of a Bill of Rights are not self-effectuating, the framers recognized the insufficiency of a mere parchment delineation of the boundaries to achieve the separation of powers. Federalist 73, Hamilton says, well, okay. Oh, sorry. That was a quote from Federalist 73. This thing got rained on when I was out there with the cigar, and I'm sorry for the confusion. The great security, wrote Madison, against a gradual concentration of the several powers in the same department consists in giving to those who administer each department the necessary constitutional means and personal motives to resist encroachment of the others. The provision for defense must, in this, as in other cases, be made commensurate to the danger of attack. That's from Federalist 51. Madison continued, but it is not possible to give to each department an equal power of self-defense. In Republican government, the legislative authority necessarily predominates. The remedy for this inconveniency is to divide the legislator into different branches and to render them by different modes of election. Okay, so you got bicameralism, different modes of election, different principles of action, as little concern and connected with each other as the nature of their common functions and their common dependence on the society will admit. As the weight of the legislative authority requires that it should be thus divided, the weakness of the executive may require, on the other hand, that it should be fortified. The major fortification provided, of course, was the veto power. So the president has a little bit of the legislative power. And I say a little bit, it's actually pretty significant. He has some of the legislative power. That's why the first sentence of Article 1 says the legislative power herein granted. Okay. Herein granted means that the legislative power, not all of it, is given to Congress, just this part right here, these parts. Some of it is given to the president in the form of a veto. He can also suggest a legislation through the State of the Union, and that's a different duty or power, depending on how you read that. All right, I'm back. Just had to take a drink of green tea. So the veto power. But to in addition to providing fortification, the founders conspicuously and very consciously declined to sap the executive's strength in the same way they had weakened the legislature by dividing executive power. They did not do that. They didn't create multiple people in the executive like they did in the Congress. In the Congress, it's two parts, Senate and House, and they have to work together in the appropriate ways in order to be powerful. Well, the executive is just one person. It's not divided. Proposals to have multiple executives. You see where I'm at here? Right here in the middle. Proposals to have multiple executives or a council of advisors with separate authority were rejected. Thus, while all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist in a Senate and House of Representatives, the executive power shall be vested in a president of the United States. That is what this suit is about. Power. The allocation of power among Congress, the president, and the courts in such a fashion as to preserve the equilibrium the Constitution sought to establish, so that a gradual concentration of the several powers in the same department, that's from Federalist 51, can effectively be resisted. Frequently, an issue of this sort will come before the court clad, so to speak, in sheep's clothing. The potential of the asserted principle to effect important change in the equilibrium of power is not immediately evident and must be discerned by a careful and perceptive analysis. But this wolf comes as a wolf. What's he alluding to there? What's he quoting there? Anybody know? Anybody know? Anybody know where the reference is? I'll show you. It comes from the Sermon on the Mount in the Bible, the Holy Bible. Matthew chapter 7. The Sermon on the Mount is from Matthew 5, 6, and 7. And around verse 15, and I'm showing it on the screen. This is the King James Version. Beware of false prophets, which come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves. And sometimes it's translated ravenous wolves. I kind of like the The New King James Version. The New American Standard Version is pretty good too. Let's see it in the New American Standard. Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravenous wolves. Ravenous wolves. That is what Justice Scalia is referring to here. He says uh, that is what this suit is all about. He says some of these threats to the separation of powers come before the court clad, so to speak, in sheep's clothing. Matthew 7:15, Sermon on the Mount. This wolf comes as a wolf. It's a direct threat. Now, what is a direct threat here? It's the attempt to take the executive power and divide it, to make it anything but the president, to add extra entities which also have the executive power, but which are not controllable by the president and therefore not accountable to the American people in an election like the president is. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound like anything that you're aware of going on right now when people are so concerned about bureaucracy being threatened, but they say the word democracy is being threatened, and it's really ironic. It's ironic because the bureaucracy pretends to be the elected representative with the executive power, but it's not. So this topic is really about power. It's about constitutional power. It's about the separation of powers and the protection of individual liberty, and it's ultimately about human flourishing. Thank you for joining me on the Republican Professor podcast. Next time, we're going to continue into Roman numeral 1 through the swirly twirly gumdrops of Justice Scalia's dissent in Morrison versus Olson, 1988. Kicked and pulled and scratched and hurt me in 1988. Remember Rain Man? Yep. And I can't wait. It's wonderful. We'll see you next time.